This is somewhat of a shorter episode, but as a first time in Bulgaria, it seemed significant and interesting enough to make a quick video. I am fully aware that a view of just one city is not automatically a corollary for the entire country, and in fact capital cities in particular are famous for being a bit of a microculture all of their own, so I won't be making sweeping observations about Bulgaria in general, just a few about what the capital is like in May. And to spoil the conclusion slightly, we really enjoyed it here. I would have happily spent another 2 weeks exploring Bulgaria if we had it, but this was actually a springboard to another destination, hence the limited time. So flying in, there'd been near zero visibility to the ground for the entire journey. When Bulgaria finally came into view, as well as a few geometric towns ringing the capital, I hadn't expected the mountains to be quite as close or impressive. The ground was an unusually deep shade of teal green, very different to what you see taking off from the UK, and vastly different from what you see when you land in the Mediterranean parts of the Balkans. So, Terminal 1, where we were, was pretty tiny, but with a little puzzling, we managed to jump on a bus to the town centre. So, with the cloudy weather, it would be tempting to leer at lots of the ageing tower blocks and be like, ugh, look at this dystopia. But that's rude. And while, yeah, this is part of the city, it's only one side of it. And to be honest, there appears to be as many modern-ish buildings as there are communist-looking ones. So the airport bus came to an abrupt halt at a bit of an odd part of town, but it worked out pretty well, as the first spot on the map I wanted to see was this. It was labelled as the Roman Wall. It was very clear from the Mirab that this was a mosque at one point. Roman, perhaps not, but an interesting slice of history buried in amongst some cafes in a side street. Also an egg vending machine, which, sure, okay. So walking towards the centre, you can't help but notice all the trams zipping by. There's odd mix of up-to-date followed by what appear to be pieces that should probably be in a museum. The church architecture in Sofia is very striking, domed structures that look entirely unlike anything you find in Western Europe. Since Bulgaria was under Ottoman control until it gained full independence following the First Balkan War, many of its largest and most impressive churches only took their current form in the last 100 or so years, but some with ancient foundation dates. This one apparently was formerly a mosque. So after walking for probably too long, we finally sat down for a quick espresso. It was an okay, if not exceptional shot to start off proceedings. I'm actually a bit embarrassed. I didn't know this before entering the country, but I just assumed that Bulgaria used the euro. So when we went to an ATM and it said BGN, that was a bit of a surprise. It might go a ways to explaining why prices are very low in Bulgaria. It regularly tops the list of cheapest places to holiday in Europe. And yeah, it turns out the exchange rate, at least at time of writing, is about double the sterling, which made the maths of everything quite simple. Rough rule of thumb, just take the price of things and halve them. And preceding this, we'd been in London for the coronation, and look, when you're in London, you have to be very careful things don't snowball and get mad pricey. And before that, by a few weeks, we were in Santorini, famous again for being just a little bit price gougey-ish. So it felt a real luxury to be dividing prices in half, which inevitably led to pints under £3 and main courses for just 7 or 8. We briefly caught this. This is the Rotunda Church, remarkably ancient with foundations in the 300s, incorporating the site of some Roman baths, and you can still see remains of hypocausts around it. The city of Sofia is built atop the remains of Roman Serdica, and there's a pretty huge selection of ruins surviving dotted all over town. Well, finding ourselves a little indecisive about what to do for lunch, we eventually gave in and settled on the restaurant adjoining the museum, and yeah, it was pretty good. In the time it took us to eat lunch, the sun suddenly emerged, and just like that, we were having a very different day from the one I'd anticipated. So to make the most, we headed to the Cathedral of Alexander Nevsky, and yeah, it's fine, I suppose. Look at it! Just look at the golden dome shining! It's pretty incredible, come on. It was begun in 1882. We did go in, but you can't take pictures inside the cathedral, and there were like 3 or 4 attendants waiting on guard for anyone who pulled out a camera phone. I did see a couple of people try. So, just the exterior, but wow, what an exterior. And next door to it, just behind this not even vaguely intimidating statue... Okay, I'm sorry. This is the historic St. Sophia. You can see it's been restored in the 20th century, but it's actually remarkably ancient. The current structure is from the 500s, most likely under Justinian, but it rests on the foundations of several structures going back to before the 300s. It's the church that gives the city its name. It's a little bit masked by trees. Somewhat vexingly, it appeared to have a funeral taking place, so we didn't get to see inside there, didn't feel like barging past grieving family and friends like, oh, excuse me, sorry, history to film. So, another reason to go back to Sofia. Oh yeah, we'll be back there pretty soon, I'm sure. And when we do, maybe the hotel that houses the amphitheatre will have, well, if not reopened, there'll at least be a way for people to see what's inside, because it's currently holding the amphitheatre ruins hostage. Well, stopped off for a coffee from Coffee Syndicate, and as well as ridiculously good eclairs, turns out these guys are award winners for their latte art, and yeah, the espresso was nicely balanced, quite light in flavour, just a hint of sourness, yeah, very well put together. We then dropped in on the museum, which has an impressive selection. The main gallery as you enter is mainly Roman stuff, which is remarkable in itself, but this is classic museum fail. I didn't realise there was a Neolithic gallery, or I would have allocated my time very differently. And these are unbelievable. I mean, considering how early they are, these are from the 5000s BC and older. I mean, look, pick any Neolithic site in the UK, and it wasn't there. Not even close, especially that one you're thinking of. Go on, admit it. Also, the Thracian artifacts are incredible. These golden masks have a striking resemblance to the famous Mycenaean death masks, although they are separated by several centuries. Now, the clock was running down before all the archaeological sites would be closing their doors, so we had to move on. Something that struck me as surprising. We are right in the capital of Bulgaria, low-angle flag shot. It's kind of quiet. I mean, the roads were flowing with a modest amount of traffic, but there weren't many people out and about. I mean, maybe it's these sort of large Soviet-era public buildings and the big spaces in between. There just weren't that many people there to fill it. I checked after, and the population of Sofia is a little over 1 million. Now, maybe I'm too used to the idea that capitals of countries are places where a huge amount of wealth gets concentrated and people flock there in massive numbers, like London or Athens, which is so much bigger than you think. It just sprawls out for miles and miles. But maybe it's just not so much the case in Eastern Europe. So Zagreb, for example, is only 800,000, and Ljubljana, that's only 279,000. That's only slightly half of Bournemouth Pool, where I'm currently based. Anyway, it's not that Sofia wasn't nice, it was just a bit more low-key than expected. Caught some other Roman bits and pieces. This is the Western Gate, just beneath this huge and incredibly modern church. There's an impressive selection of structures visible along the Caniggia Maria Lucia, excavated while the metro was being built, and with the Ottoman Mosque of Banja Bashi in the background. Towering above the city, the statue of St. Sofia is unmissable and almost aggressively different to Christian art traditions. It almost seems like a stylistic callback to the ancient roots of the Bulgars on the Caspian steppe. It defiantly occupies the space where a statue of Lenin formerly stood, so firmly planting the flag for Bulgarian identity. Just briefly saw the small but surprisingly beautiful church of St. Pector, standing as an island in the modern construction around it. And in this subway, it's quite a surprise. There's this whole selection of building foundations that have been excavated and preserved down here. Okay, well, I realised the odds of finding a 100% authentic Bulgarian experience were slim. I did want to try some traditional Bulgarian food. This Share a Mixed Grill certainly promised that. It was nice, I mean, quite oily. Not a lot of strong flavours, actually. I was wondering if there was going to be like a lot of garlic, for example, but apart from the barbecue taste, it was pretty straightforward stuff. I might have been the only male in the whole city with long hair. I mean, maybe because it was the bank holiday, there were armies of teenagers out and about, and few of them managed more than about a centimetre between them. So we spent the evening drinking in a loose assortment of bars and restaurants in Sofia in an attempt to sort of kill time ahead of the next leg of our trip. By the way, the Bulgarians, unbelievable levels of English. I mean, I'm always humbled when the Croats or the Greeks or anyone can speak English fluently like a native, but the Bulgarians, I mean, I'm not aware there are hordes of Brits coming through here on holiday, yet impeccable English by nearly every waitress, barista or museum staffer we met. Yeah, I mean, big kudos all round. So as it approached midnight, we headed to the bus station, only about a 20-minute walk away. Just a tiny note, by the way, I have a sort of affection for Flixbuses, both for how cheap they are and how they open up Europe. One of the next series we're doing pivoted on Flixbuses, more on that at the end, but time and time again I've learned if you're in a new town and you found the main bus station, okay, well done. Now, look for an obscure corner, possibly a separate little section entirely, likely screened from view in some way, And that's probably where the Flixbus will leave from. It keeps happening. If I didn't stay curious, I'd have missed my bus on several occasions. I think we just barely scraped 7 of us on board here, but after a bit of a fiddle, we were on the way through the night to see Istanbul. Now, I realised it would make sense to make Istanbul the next episode. This was a first visit and, perhaps counterintuitively, the cheapest, if, not the most comfortable way to do this, was flying into Sofia. Now, flights there seem to stay very low for whatever reason. And then, yes, bus through the night. It's about a 7-hour trip or so to Istanbul. However, I'm not ready to do Istanbul yet. I can see how daft this is going to sound. I was a bit deflated that the 72 hours we were there were nearly entirely cloudy and actually quite chilly and windy. I was worried we'd be sort of packed into baking streets just searching for the next oasis of aircon, but no. Clearly, there's a lot about the Black Sea climate I don't know. But it was kind of a shock that, save a few breaks in the clouds letting a little bit of blue through, but yet this end of May, early June really felt more like February. We managed a good amount in a short time winner, the Hagia Sophia, the Blue Mosque. I hadn't realised, but this was actually the first time inside a mosque. The majority of mosques don't want non-Muslims inside, and yeah, fair enough, okay. I mean, we couldn't go inside any in Marrakesh, for example, but yeah, the Blue Mosque was quite the experience. Anyway, also the northern half of the Theodosian Walls, the Galata Tower. I'm not just going to list off all the Istanbul things, but I really feel like I have decidedly unfinished business there, so it won't be an episode just yet. So after one last Adana kebab, we were back to the vast Istanbul bus terminal to catch the return Flixbus. It had a rather 80s retro feel to the place, but having seen Flixbuses coming and going, started to get a little anxious when our exact one was not materialising. So after walking the length of the very large concourse, turned out it was ready to leave just round this corner out of sight from the rest of the yard, so ran to get Sean, just made it back on. What did I say? Finding your Flixbus is often half the challenge. So, after another rather uncomfortable night on a very stuffy bus, this time it was almost packed for this leg, just the briefest of codas, we arrived back in a rainy Sofia around 6 in the morning, sort of trudged to find the first halfway decent place that was open for coffee, and eventually slumped down here. Just didn't really have the energy to do any more exploring, and we actually needed to catch the metro quite early anyway to the airport. This birdcage kind of system they've got is definitely distinct. So that's only the briefest glimpse of Bulgaria, but Sofia was more than enough to keep you engrossed, and I am impatient to go back. Now, earlier, I teased that we had a trip that hinged on Flixbus, and yes, this was rather ambitious. Anyone who knows me knows that I love a group trip. I've been piecing together weekends away for years now. I organised, ran and catered my own stag do, pretty much just so I had an excuse to get 27 of my friends to a weekend in Wales. But this had always been group trips in the UK. I'd never tried one that involved flights. So, we ended up planning a trip that became known as the Flixbus Rampage. It was capitals in Central and Eastern Europe, so starting in Prague, then on buses to Bratislava, Budapest, Zagreb, and finally Ljubljana. In a first draft, I actually had us carrying on to Sarajevo, Belgrade, and then Sofia, but it seemed that it was sort of diminishing returns in terms of how much distance we'd have to cover to manage those, and yeah, as it turned out, doing 5 capitals was more than full on enough. Anyway, this was an incredible trip, and that's going to be going out very soon. But before we do that, while it's not an Istanbul episode, we had another trip I took with Sean and Cal. Next episodes, we're going to be exploring the west coast of Turkey. It was this vast journey where we covered close to the entire height of Anatolia, north to south, as well as deep into the interior. So that's where we're heading next. If you've enjoyed the music in the background, that's ours. We create all the music for these episodes, and you can find it on bandcamp.com. If you want to support the channel, that's the place to do it. But please do also subscribe and leave a comment. You can find us on all the socials, so please join us there, and we'll catch you very soon.